What's up guys, welcome back to Tidal Gardens. It's been some time since my last tank update, 3 months if anyone wasn't keeping count, and there are definitely some visible updates to the tank. So without further ado, let's just dive right into it. The first thing you may have noticed is my update in rock work. It's nothing too grand, but it serves a purpose. In most of my footage, you may realize that my fish are a bit camera shy, or even just people shy for that matter, always tucked inside their little frog spawn hideaways or peeking around a rock. My foxface specifically would always turn his speckled camouflaged colors if even the smallest disturbance was made to the tank. Stepping back, I realized that he really didn't have a large space to hide. So I decided to try and make a bit of a barrier for him to increase his hiding space and maybe tone down that fish anxiety. To complete the project, I decided to use some rock scraps that we had lying around and sort of stack them on top of one another to create this wall archway combo. I would have tried to make a more glamorous structure like the ones that I currently have in my tank, however we have recently deconstructed our reefing sandbox. You might remember seeing it in previous videos. It was a large table of sand and was the area that we constructed all of our various rockscapes that we have throughout the building. We use sand and super glue to fuse rock pieces together to create custom shapes, and without the sand pit, it's harder to do that. So for the time being, I will just be sensibly stacking random pieces of rock and hope that they don't fall down. So far, the foxface really seems to be enjoying his newfound privacy screen, so hopefully I'm going to be able to see him coming out of his shell a little bit more now that he has a space to go hide if he needs to. The rock work also added a lot more surface area to add in more corals, so that will be fun to play with as time goes on. I currently have a couple pieces already enjoying the space, and I hope to add in some more soon. So speaking of corals, the next things you may have noticed might have been the new corals, the movement of corals, the absence of corals, or even the fact that I still have Acropora alive and growing. So let's just get into that. Starting from left to right, I have taken out the rainbow pectinia and replaced it with a plating party crasher cyphastria. A few videos ago in this series, I was freaking out over my pectinia receding, and it just never really got any better. More skeletons started showing, it was constantly getting taken over by sponge that I couldn't seem to get rid of, and I finally just gave in and got rid of it because honestly, it was just making me feel horrible just looking at it all the time. And not to mention, it was taking up valuable real estate. The plating cyphastria I'm hoping will do nicely, and in the future I might want a leather or a sea fan of some sort behind it to fill up that space and add some needed movement to that side of the tank, because right now it's kinda stale if I'm being honest. The colors are nice, but there's definitely not a lot of movement happening right now. Next, I went ahead and removed the Palithoa grandis from my Zoa garden. After my visit to Las Vegas with Than and talking with Graham Stephan about his Palithoa overload, I realized I might want to get that frag out of there while it's still contained to the frag plug. I wouldn't want to be in the same situation as Graham, where my Palithoa takes over the whole rock and kicks my other Zoas out, and I'm not able to do anything about it at risk of getting palitoxin poisoning. So I went ahead and added 2 new Zoa frags in its place, some blue hornets and some gamma rays. Now moving on to the arches, I recently placed a branching cyphastria on this one archway, and I saw it began to grow a little bit pale, specifically in the one spot that was turned upwards. I figured it was just in the same situation as my Platinum Halo Montipora was in that similar spot, where it was just getting too much light, and so it really down-colored. After I moved that Montipora towards the back of the tank, it bounced right back with impressive speed. So maybe by moving the cyphastria back to this spot over here, it might bounce back as well. After removing it, I added in a frag of Acropora crust that I hope will A, enjoy the higher light, and B, eventually get into a branching shape and grow upwards and take up some more space. Another coral I ended up removing was the Montipora setosa I had sitting right here on this archway. It had lost the majority of its color, and I would have moved it the same as I had with the branching Cyphastria, but it already had some algae growing on it and was really, really down colored compared to what it normally is, and so I had a feeling that it was already past the point of no return. And I thought that was really sad because I liked how unique this specific coral was, but I was just too late. I wasted too much time and didn't do anything about it, and that's completely on me. It did end up working out, however, because that spot was right where I needed my new rock work to connect, and I would have had to move it regardless. On the topic of new rock work, to start filling it out with corals, I went ahead and added a Spitfire Leptastria as well as an Acanthastria bowerbanki at the bottom. I absolutely love the bright spots of yellow that come with having a Spitfire Leptastria. I don't often see yellow in LPS corals. The only other instance I can think of, from corals that I've seen anyway, is the Antivenom Phovites that I have growing in my tank. So I really can't wait for it to grow out and take over this little section and just light everything up with color. Finally, some updates to the corals that are still here and haven't been moved. I've noticed some pretty nice growth in the SPS in my tank, which is awesome. The Platinum Halo Montipora being the most substantial. It's a bit hard to see because it's towards the back of my tank in an awkward spot, but it's really starting to take over the back of this rock and also sporting a pretty funky color pattern. My acros have also grown a bit since putting them in my tank. Not a whole lot, but definitely enough to show that they're doing well. The little Sato Taguchi acro that I have growing on this ledge even has some pretty nice polyp extension, which surprised me a lot. Still not a lot of growth, but I'll take anything that signifies a healthy coral at this point. Same thing with my Hawkins Acropora. After putting it in my tank, I was told that it's actually a pretty finicky coral, which made me scared that it was going to die almost immediately. But hey, it is still kicking and has a little bit of growth added to it, so I must be doing something right. My Stylophora has also finally started showing some new branches after being in my tank for quite some time now. This is one of the first SPS corals in my tank, so it makes me really happy to see that it's finally getting some noticeable growth. Another coral's growth that I'm quite happy about is my neon green candy cane coral, which has started splitting into more mouths and is so fluffy. Oh my goodness. Same thing with my Blastomusa. Both corals are super fat and super happy. However, not everything can be super fat and super happy in this tank, apparently. Currently, my Miss Piggy Goniapora and my Bernardpora, or Microgoni? I can never remember which is which. Anyway, they are both looking quite sad as of recently. I'm hoping maybe they'll bounce back. I mean, the Miss Piggy isn't fully closed up, so maybe there's some hope in that. Or maybe I'm just in denial about the fact that Goniapora still isn't working for my tank. My tank might be good for Acropora now, but Goniapora still remains a challenge. Let me know in the comments what would be an easier alternative to Goniapora that would give me some nice movement, because I already have the teal Duncans over here that are pretty big. I'd prefer something that won't be super aggressive towards them, if that even exists at all. Moving on to the pest aspect of my tank, I'm just gonna let you guys take a peek and tell me, do you see any Aiptasia? Because I sure don't. There are lots of verminid snails, but we'll get to that in a sec. Don't start roasting me in the comments just yet, thanks. Back to the Aiptasia. Yes, my long battle with them has ended, and it actually wasn't wholly due to my Reef Delete. It was actually a combo of the Reef Delete and some Bergia nudibranchs. Originally, I thought I was going to be able to completely eradicate the Aiptasia using only the Reef Delete, which I'm sure a lot of people were able to do. I just didn't realize how much diligence it would take on my part, so absolutely no shade towards ITC, this is purely a me issue. With how big some of these heads were, I'd have to be zapping them multiple times per day, and frankly, I don't have the time. This tank is an office tank, which means I'm only around it when I'm working my standard 9 to 5. I only have time to do intricate maintenance like this when I have the downtime between projects, which isn't as often as I would need to completely get rid of the Aiptasia. I have enough time to maybe do an Aiptasia barbecue session once a day if I'm lucky. However, because of the occasional zaps with my reefing lightsaber, I was able to get them to a smaller size, and that's when they started disappearing. Turns out the nudibranchs weren't entirely gone from the tank, they just didn't want to eat the big stuff. One day, when I was cleaning my tank, I go to move the magnetic scraper, and out drops a very alive Bergia nudibranch. I quickly migrated the little guy into my rock by means of turkey baster, and soon my Aiptasia population started completely disappearing. Moving on to the current issue at hand, the verminids. The tank is coated with them. I know, I see them. The corals don't seem to mind yet, but it would be nice to not have them clogging my power heads and making my rock look like giant sea urchins. Probably the most basic response to this would be, "Hey Becca, why don't you just scrape them off?" To which I would respond, "You're really underestimating how much surface area is covered by these things." I'm gonna take a shot in the dark and say if you calculated the entire surface area that my tank and rock would provide, 2/3 of that number would be covered in verminids. Which also leads me to a similar problem that I had with my Aiptasia removal process, and that's, I ain't got time for that. So the solution to the verminid issue is going to be adding a good amount of bumblebee snails to do the job for me. We have seen firsthand that they do a really good job of getting rid of verminids. What they do is they essentially liquefy the verminids like an acid would, which is pretty cool, and something I definitely need for this tank. Alright, now on to fish. First and foremost, my clownfish is very much ready to lay eggs. She is ginormous. We are hoping that the egg laying hasn't stalled or compacted in any way, so I'm currently keeping a close eye on her to make sure that nothing has gone wrong, but she looks pretty normal to me. She's just very pregnant. Even when the fish I have aren't hiding and are swimming around, I still find that my tank looks like it's lacking in the fish department. I still have the wrasse, the 2 clowns, and the fox face in here, but I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it doesn't look like enough. The tank looked a lot livelier with the tang and the copper band, but as you know, the tang was moved to one of our other show tanks to make room for the copper band and to avoid stressing it out due to the usual tang dominance issues that usually arise with this type of fish. That turned out to be in vain because then the copper band had the nerve to go ahead and die from stress anyway, and now I don't want to move the tang back in because he looks really happy in the Euphilia show tank and is expected to get too big for my tank anyway. So when it comes to possibly getting new fish, I don't want a fish that will get too big. But maybe having a handful of smaller fish might be nice, like a few cardinals or some firefish gobies. Or if I had to choose just one fish, I've always loved the all-black tang that we have in our Peninsula show tank. It just looks like a little shadow swimming around, and it's such a cool contrast to the other fish. One thing I've been putting off for a lot longer than I probably should have is deep cleaning various parts of my tank. Specifically the power heads. These things haven't been fully cleaned since I first added them to my tank over 8 months ago. Mainly due to, I didn't know they had to be. After all that time, they've acquired quite the coating of vermitid snails and algae to the point where they looked like underwater hedgehogs. And that isn't an ideal look. So in order to get the majority of this stuff off, I needed to acid bath them. When dipping equipment, we usually use citric acid. Sometimes vinegar can work, but we found that citric acid usually does a better job at removing stubborn substances like verminids, for example. Before going in with the citric acid, I went ahead and removed any loose debris that could easily be removed without using acid, like the film algae. This will just prevent our buckets of acid from getting really gross really fast. After giving them a good rinse, I moved them to our acid buckets for a half hour and pretended to be productive while I waited for them to finish. Afterwards, you'll still see the verminids attached to the power heads, but they will be significantly easier removed now that they've been dipped in citric acid. When you're deep cleaning the pumps, you'll want to make sure all of that citric acid is cleaned off. You don't want to risk contaminating your tank, so I went ahead and broke down my pumps, not only to clean out the verminids and excess algae that might still be in there, but also to make sure I didn't miss any acid residue that could still be lingering. After rinsing it for longer than necessary, just in case, I put them back into the tank, and I'm telling you, they look so good as compared to 30 minutes ago. And come to find out, my flow is getting really constricted by all the verminids. Go figure. Okay, so we've already talked about some of the nexts for this tank, but let's talk about some more. So, to recap on the ones I already talked about, I want more fish, I just don't know what kind yet. I also want some more corals to maybe replace the Goniopora that won't cause any harm to my Duncans, while still adding some movement. And then also, I want to add in a sea fan or a leather coral behind my plating Cyphastrea. Great, we're all caught up. Additionally, on the coral side of things, I want to fill in my new rock that I've added as well as the space around my candy cane coral. I definitely want to add in some mushrooms to this space. I think it would be a super cool look, specifically around the neon green candy cane. I also want to try my luck with some Nephthia. I really like the look of various leathers in general, but I think the growth patterns of Nephthia are super neat, and we have some neon green Nephthia frags up for grabs that I could try out. As far as SPS goes, I think I'm done trying with any new Acropora for the time being. I figured with the ones that I do have, I'm pretty set for now, and I don't feel like pushing my luck with them any further than I already have. As far as hardware goes, I really enjoyed the look of the gyre pumps that we saw in Graham and Andrew's tanks recently, so that could be an idea. Do I know if it will be a good fit for my tank at all? No. Have I talked to literally anyone else about this? No. So we'll just see what happens in that regard. Alright everyone, that's all I really have to say about my current tank situation. It's definitely come a long way, and now that the Aiptasia are gone for good, I can't wait to gradually add more and more corals to this tank and really fill it out with lots of color. Comment down below some things you might want to see added as well that I probably didn't mention. If you haven't already, like and subscribe for more Reef Aquarium content, and if you're feeling super generous, go ahead and subscribe to our Patreon for exclusive Tidal Gardens coral photography. Until next time guys, happy reefing.